Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 300 of the Here We Are podcast. This is so exciting, so much fun. This episode is going to be different than any other episode of the podcast. Rather than interviewing a scientist, as I have done each week for the past 6 years, I'm going to do a solo episode, a new thing that I'm experimenting with, thinking maybe once a month I'll give a little bit of a background about myself until I kind of cover enough of how I came to put this podcast together, the sort of things that I'm into, the bigger ideas and topics that I'm pursuing, and thinking through in my consciousness exploration as I go around and interview different academics in different fields. And I just wanted to say thank you all so much for 300 episodes. Every single one of you listened to all 300 episodes. Some of you listened to them 2 or 3 times. You took notes. you wrote positive reviews. There are for real. There's some people out there that have heard every episode of Here We Are. That's incredible. Holy cow! I've had people write me every single episode. Amazing. Wow. I've never listened to an episode of my own podcast. I was there when they happened. But good on you. Those that I've connected with on a level that just resonates with you. That's so cool. This is such a different podcast and different kind of experience. And I know just like in music, different genre. I've different albums, different artists, different genres that I listen to when I'm in particular moods, and the same thing happens with podcasting. So to know that there's people out there that committed, that are subscribing, that are listening to every episode, super cool. And I wanted to give a little bit more of a background about me and about the show, and if it's something that, if you're like, hey, I just want to hear what the scientists have to say, I want to hear more about their research. Well, don't you worry. First of all, awesome that you that you connect more with that. You're going to get all sorts of those episodes. There's going to be one out later this week. I'm just going to be doing these solo episodes as a bonus, in addition to the Here We Are podcast that would already be releasing each week. Once in a while, I'll stick one of these bonus solo episodes out, and I think it will give people a lot of background. It's also getting me out of my comfort zone. I've been wanting to do something like this for a while, just to give people a little more context and a little more understanding of where I'm coming from and why I'm interested in the subjects that I'm interested in, what my biases are. And I have been nervous about it, and I thought, this is the time. I've thought about it in episode 100, 150, 200, different periods of time, and that I've thought about, like, well, let's just hear about me. And I just have been so scared because I love oversharing on the podcast. Absolutely. When I can make myself vulnerable, when I can share something personal about myself, when we're talking about, say, childhood development, and I'm able to share a personal story about something that happened to me as a child, when we're talking about depression, and I'm able to share some of the struggles that I've been through, when we're talking about relationship stuff, and I'm able to share a fun anecdote about one of my exes or something like that, and some disagreement that we got in once that makes the research resonate a little bit more, maybe a little bit more accessible, and also helps people realize is one of the fun things about being a comedian and making yourself vulnerable is not only is it a wonderfully therapeutic experience for the most part, and sometimes challenging and hard to share some of these things that isn't really in the in the nature of the sort of things that you don't hear in your regular 9-to-5 workspace that might not be appropriate to share, or even things that a lot of times our own family and friends, maybe we can't share different mental health things, and comedians are in this really unique position where we kind of get valued to share that stuff. And so I love doing stuff like that. Here, what makes me nervous is something like an autobiographical, like, listen to my triumph over this and that, and how a young Midwestern, how am I still referring to myself as young? Midwestern bumpkin who never fit into the standard school system in his upbringing was able to go from factory work to a successful comedy career for a time, and then deviated from that, gave it all up to pursue his interests, his curiosities in understanding consciousness and life itself, and these kind of heroic, the hero journeys that some people like hearing. I often think that it's they can be a little self-indulgent. And it just like makes me a little uncomfortable and a little embarrassed when you have to, especially as a comedian, you have to write these bios and sell this. I was on Conan O'Brien 5 times. You got to do all of these things to put these little stamps of validation all over the the marquee or whatever your sales pitch. You want to get people in the door. And at the end of the day, I find that stuff a little embarrassing, if I'm being honest with you. But the reason why this could be really helpful for you to know a little bit more about me is because it might help you understand where I'm coming from when I'm doing these interviews, where I might have some real life experience that is really valuable, that perhaps one of my academic guests is missing, in much more commonly the other way, where I probably have some bias of mine, where I have some oversight that if you become a bit more aware of, then maybe you'll see some of the errors that I'm maybe making in my misunderstanding of some of the information, and that will hopefully bring a clearer picture of reality and some of the research and ideas that we're exploring to you, if you know the many ways in which I'm wrong, essentially, instead of just thinking because I'm talking into a microphone I know what I'm talking about. So a good example of this is, say, I had I never fit into school. Okay, so this makes for this nice, fun little autobiographical, like a journalist might amplify this, like, oh, this guy who never fit in and didn't do well and didn't do homework or pay attention and skipped class and did all these things and never had any interest in even going to college, has now found himself going around to colleges, getting perhaps a uh, maybe even a greater, or certainly at least longer over the course of the next 20 years or so that I continue to do this, I'll be getting a heck of an education, more than 2 to 4 or 5 years of the average person's institution. So that the average person's academic studies or whatever, especially if they abandon their degree and go into something else. The point is that might make for a fun little narrative, a fun little story to maybe get people to read an article about the two subjects that people don't care that much about. One is stand-up comedy or comedy generally, and 2, science. So sure, fun little story, right? Cool little narrative. But more importantly to me is that you understand that when, and more importantly to you, I would say, is that you understand that when I have someone on talking about, say, ADHD, this happened recently, and they're like, well, a big part of school is the social aspect of school. And I go, hold on there. That's a very convincing narrative to people that really gelled in school and did well in school and enjoyed school. The sorts of people that became scientists because they loved school so much they wanted to stay in school their entire lives. Well, there's a lot of other people that had a whole different experience, including myself. And not only will that maybe help you relate, you the listener, that might be one of those people like me that also didn't really like traditional organized education, but love educating yourself and following your natural curiosity, and really get a kick out of this show because I kind of bring this average Joe-ish approach or whatever to these interviews, right? So that's one aspect of it. But the other important aspect that I think it's maybe even more critical for people to understand is that I'm incredibly biased. I'm my years in school was like a prison to me. So I have this very dramatic reaction when thinking, which is also unfair and not really a full picture of, especially as much as school has perhaps advanced in the last 20 to 30 years. And so it's important for you to know when maybe I'm just being cynical about our education system, and I might have my own misunderstandings and a whole lot of blind spots out there. It's important for you to know that, because not having a traditional academic education means that I have some very serious gaps in some just basic understanding of like, oh, what is a p-value again, and why is that important? Some stuff that you're learning like 101 of basic science courses, basic data analytics courses, things like that. So that's why I'm going to start doing these solo episodes, and I hope that you'll maybe send me some feedback and let me know a little more of what you'll be about, but they'll also allow me to maybe, say, share my early childhood experience, and then have on the following episode some childhood development person, maybe someone who works with researches say juvenile chimps or something like that. Maybe someone who studies childhood development from an evolutionary perspective, or someone who studies non-neurotypical children, or works with kids with autism, something like that. So that's the idea. And so for this first one, I just kind of wanted to give a general sense. So this episode could be something that a first-time listener could maybe get a sense of the show a little bit better, and any long-time listeners will have just a little more of what's going on behind the scenes. Because I kind of forget that because this is a science show and often quite serious, and the intent of it isn't to be a comedy podcast, though we have laughs. I forget that a lot of people don't even know that I'm a comedian. A lot of people just are interested in science stuff, came across this because it came up and got recommended because they're interested in other science podcasts. That's happened before, where I've been headlining a comedy club. I'm the main act. I'm the name on the marquee, and someone comes up afterwards and is like, "Oh, I've listened to some of your episodes of your podcast, and I didn't even know this was you. That I was my friends brought me here. I didn't know until you were on stage, and I heard your voice. I didn't even realize you were a comedian." Which they probably hadn't listened to that many episodes of this, if that's the case, because I often share some of my personal experiences. But the point is that I sometimes forget, oh yeah, that not everyone knows everything about, not everyone's heard my whole spiel on, like, say Mark Maron did a pretty good introduction to who I am episode or whatever. I've been on, like, say Pete Holmes or Duncan Trussell's podcast a number of times. So people from their podcasts that kind of religiously listen to them might have a pretty good sense of who I am, but a lot of people might not. So the Here We Are podcast, it's a science podcast that I created to really just pursue my natural curiosities about life. What is the meaning of all of the? What is this experience? When we say something is good or bad, what do we mean by that? When we say the purpose of life is to get to heaven, or to love one another, or to raise a family, or to serve your community, those sorts of things. Why do we say that? Why do we assume that's the purpose? Why do we come up with those ideas? The things that might seem very obvious, like, why does sex feel good? A question that most people never even occurs to them to ask. If you ask someone why sex feels good, it just does. Or why do you have sex? Because it feels good. And why do you have friends? Why bother with friends? I mean, people might say, well, friends make life worth living, or friends help you out, or they help when you need to move furniture or whatever. But we're one of the few social animals on Earth. A lot of species out there don't busy themselves with friends, have no interests in having friends. Very few species out there certainly care about other species. Or domesticate some other species. So when we ask a question like, why do you like dogs? I think a lot of the times the answer is just like, well, I just do. And that's simply not good enough for me. That drives me crazy. That the answer of just like, well, this is the surface level perception. That's why I do a thing. And no need to look into it further. Those are the sorts of things that have driven me crazy for a lifetime, that have driven much of my curiosity in life. And part of why I didn't like school and education is because I didn't feel like I was getting satisfying answers to those questions. In fact, I oftentimes, when in terms of, say, my religious upbringing, I felt that I wasn't able to even question things like what happens when you die, or what actually is evil or a sin, and is it really a sin, and how do we define that? So these are the questions that I remember having from such an early age. And for me, science is the greatest tool that the greatest tool makers on Earth have ever come up with. I haven't appreciated it my whole life. I've gained. I didn't pay attention to science classes in school. Shortly after, in high school and leading into becoming more of an independent adult, my natural curiosities from, say, the age of 16 started heading toward science, starting with technology, physics, leading into evolution, where we came from, the Big Bang, our place in the universe, where are we going? Just kind of on the surface, it started there. I started finding the answers that resonated with me there, and it just kept on going. And through my comedy career, early on, I just kept that interest separate. I did my kind of absurdist material, or maybe sometimes shock value-ish, or material or whatever, and it was really just about being funny for funny's sake. And through the course of my career, I had a harder time keeping these lives separate, my pursuit of knowledge and understanding separate from my comedy, until it eventually, sometimes I barely even feel like a comedian anymore. I've been swallowed up by my obsession, my yearning, my journey to really understand consciousness itself. And because as much as I would really love to understand as many different fields of study as possible, this consciousness is kind of this thing that we're all living in and experiencing. And at the end of the day, we are in our own kind of center of our own universe of perception. So even though we can intellectually know that we might be but a speck of sand in this vast universe or whatever, there's still no escaping that I don't have access necessarily to the information that's happening in another galaxy right now, and we're all kind of having to work with what we have, and we're living within that experience of perception and consciousness that we're in. And it's an infinite amount of each person's life and perceptual experience of it, their conscious experience of life, is a kind of a universe onto itself. And so it doesn't matter if you live to be 1 or 100 years old. That's still all of your conscious experience in that time was all that there was for you in that universe. And so being a bit of like a thrill seeker and an explorer, and someone who's traveled around and taken a bunch of chances and done this non-traditional path of kind of becoming a comedian, which is just kind of a really crazy thing to get into, but also going and having traveling around the world, doing a number of rebelling and going against different social norms and experimenting with different mind-altering substances and things like that. That I can tell you at the end of the day, the exploration of consciousness is really the greatest adventure that I could really find myself being on. And so I thought I'd share with you a little flashback to when this podcast happened. So I found an email that I wrote to my dear friends, Mike Kaplan and Zach Sherwin, are two hilarious comedians who are also quite musically inclined, and also just sweet, lovely fellas that care deeply about making the world a better place. And I sent them. I had been chatting with scientists for a few years at this point, and forming some friendships within academia, and feeling out how I wanted to pursue, how I wanted to kind of mix comedy and science, and I recorded a couple episodes of Here We Are that hadn't been released yet, and I wanted them to do the theme song. And so I wrote to them that let's see, I wrote, the name of the podcast is Here We Are. The premise of the podcast is that I'm going around the country talking to scientists about why we are here and what makes us who we are. I thought of the name because when I think about how we evolved and our purpose here, I often feel like we are chance's misfits. We're just kind of plopped out into the world and left to sort things out. Sometimes I get lost in awe thinking about this and the complexity of it all, and I think to myself, well, here we are. This might sound like a bummer to some, but to me, the randomness and chances of all of us getting to be alive makes me appreciate life more. The more I learn, the more I appreciate it. And so I sent them that email, and then they wrote this lovely theme song that I think captures it quite well.
Are we?
Yes.
Where are we?
Here.
Why are we here? Not entirely clear. We are misfits thrust into existence by random chance, with no hints at all as to how we're supposed to make sense of it all. It's immensely bizarre. Here we are.
So back at the beginning of the Here We Are podcast, it was really had to do with my kind of foundation. My starting point was really kind of evolutionary psychology and biology. And by the way, these aren't. I put very little stake in my understanding of, say, even what consciousness is when I say I'm exploring consciousness. but also I don't, because I really connected with those fields. It's not that I think that they're flaw free or anything like that. But that was the origin. The real obsession of mine at the time was looking at life, a re-examination of life and perception from a Darwinian point of view. So a lot of people kind of think about the evolution as just like something that happened or it didn't, and that's all that you need to know about it. You believe in evolution? Terrific. You're one of these. You're not denying science. You're not one of these goofball creationists that fell for whatever this organized religion stuff or whatever. So it's like there's this debate. What was it? Evolution or creation? And like, okay, I believe in evolution, and done. And or people see like the evolution chart of like a monkey solely through evolution standing upright, and then you go, wow, so evolution made us stand upright. Cool. We stand upright now. All right. Now back, I'm getting on with my day, but I would say a lot of people don't realize how much evolution factors into our life, our sense of purpose, what makes us who we are, the decisions that we make, the reason why you connect to some of the things that I'm saying, the reason why I am interested in these topics that we're talking about right now. All of these things have underlying evolutionary underpinnings. So the reason why you're attracted to someone, why you might be more attracted to, say, a symmetrical face than an asymmetrical face, for example. The reason why you value money or spend money in the way that you do, the reason why you might spend what seems like an irrational amount of money on a date might actually be a rather small investment compared to when measured through the evolutionary lens of perhaps what that date might mean in terms of leading to offspring or a family, and your genes actually perpetuating through time. And so the ways in which evolution shaped our brains, the ways in which it shaped our perception, why we say value or put so much stock in say visual things or this language stuff, and less so although we are impacted by hormones in our sense of smell. We use a lot less of that kind of olfactory perception to navigate our world. So why is that? And to understand that is to understand the nature of reality that we find ourselves in. And So when I started kind of looking at life this way, it just changed the way that I saw every single thing. It changed the way that I saw people behaving on the news, when what we value when we see a movie, and there's the hero, the good guy and the bad guy doing this and that. Why we value sports so much, why we have religion, why we have this propensity to believe in this higher power, and that sort of thing is so fundamental to understanding our perception and what drives us. And yeah, I'm not a motivational speaker. If anything, I'm probably a little toward the cynical side. I'm a little toward the dark side of things. I find myself just almost pathologically asking, what is the point of any of it? Why keep going on? Like, I've certainly had lots of periods of time in my life when I've struggled to get out of bed, and I'm not here to be a cheerleader. Is another thing that, like, I kind of enjoy the darkness. I love a good existential crisis. It sometimes feels a lot more real to me than the sloganeering of just believe in yourself, and these little platitudes and little quips that we share on social media or plaster around our house, and just like, yeah, today I am going to seize the day. So and that's not to go, I believe the other way can be equally delusional, to just give up and think that there's no hope, or to feel helpless or whatever. But the reason why I say all this is because I do think that learning about some of these basic underlying mechanisms in life can help you shape, or at least understand your life better. And through understanding, you can perhaps figure out exactly what it is that you want to get out of, and out of this short existence here, and why. So you might think, well, love is the answer to everything, and love connects us all, and if we just had love, and if everyone loved each other, wouldn't that be terrific? Wouldn't the world be a better place? Well, I'd ask, why aren't other species that are doing quite well, seemingly having this kind of social experience of love in the way that we talk about it in a love song, for example. And I would say that love is an emotional driver. It evolved to drive us toward, ultimately, the survival of our genes, and to know that your genes this rather blind process. Your genes don't really care about you. You don't really care about your genes, because how could you? Your genes don't have the capacity to care about you. You could learn enough and care about your genes, but at the end of the day, do you care if your genes exist 1,000,000 years from now? Or do you want to make this experience more meaningful and easier for you, maybe eliminate suffering. And so it might seem like at first that this is some attack on love. That's often the sense that I feel from people is that science is like there's often a defense of sciences. You don't want to don't dissect the frog. If you want to understand humor, don't dissect the frog, right? That sort of thing, or you're making everything like too sterile, or something like that. But to me, if love is that important to you, then understanding what it's about could potentially help you understand how to get more of it, how to understand why love is sometimes a frustrating thing, why you might love someone else, they don't love you, why you can love something for a while and then lose interest, why there's all of these different conflicting is love and hate, are these the opposite things? Understanding what's going on in the brain from a neuroscience point of view, understanding some of the evolutionary underpinnings that say created love is to me to not just understand love, perhaps get more of it, but it's also to have the full experience or a fuller experience of this existence. It's to live within the reality that does exist and live the fullest life based on not just a nice little story that we tell ourselves to keep going, but to keep going in pursuit of what is the real story, what is the truth, and how can we use that to potentially benefit our lives. So that's sort of the take that I had early on, was that Darwinian theory was this underrepresented, under-talked about, or underappreciated perception, and if people understood it better, I do believe that the world would be a better place. Because all of the things that you don't like in life, you want to understand what role evolution had in driving those things as well, and driving, say, murder or violence or cheating or stealing or what have you, these things that we deem to be bad. Certain pain, I would prefer to not experience a whole lot of pain in my life if I can avoid some of it, but to understand what pain evolved for, and how and to appreciate pain, and to appreciate how pain can sometimes keep you safe. So those aspects of pain can actually lead to you experiencing a longer, fuller life than if you couldn't feel pain. You'd probably be dead by now. And so to understand that also helps understand some of these negative experiences that we have, understanding things like anxiety, for example, rather than just getting swept away in it or trying to avoid it, really in conjunction with just mindfulness and bringing a curiosity to it and an exploration to it, I think leads to living a better life. So, in looking at life through this evolutionary lens, that led me to see all sorts of gaps within my knowledge and within the field of, say, evolutionary psychology, which is, if I wanted to have a clearer lens of the reality of life, I would need to start learning a bit more about neuroscience. I would need to start learning a bit more about, say, economics or biology, or I would need to take some modern sociology. And so it just kind of expanded from there. That was the foundation, and then everything expanded. It's mostly just kind of seeing the gaps in my knowledge that I think would, and there's infinite numbers of gaps and infinite numbers of fields that I could explore, and understanding which ones are probably the most worth pursuing and educating myself on. So, and which ones I'm just the most interested in. And so a lot of times people might say, have heard me talk on another podcast, or and been like, oh, cool, this guy has some like interesting takes on life, talks about these big ideas in some novel ways, shares a few fun science studies, made me think a little bit more than, say, the average podcast where we're just like sitting around sharing drinking stories or whatever. Also very valid source of entertainment. But I've got attention from that, and then sometimes people might go, well, I'm going to check this podcast out and find that that maybe they're not. Look at it, hear me talk about meaning and purpose in life and these biases that and spin this cool narrative, or share my interpretation of a psychedelic experience or something like that, and want to know more. And they might look and they might think, well, I'm not interested in these topics that he's exploring. I'm not interested in say childhood stress contagion or something like that. I just want to hear that meaning of life stuff again, or maybe you hear people often like hearing me talk about science, and maybe they find some of the academics a hair too dry, or maybe a little too jargony, or just don't relate to a given field. And first of all, I get that. But I also want to say that that's part of, these are just filling in. When you see something like that, when you see that I'm exploring something that might seem kind of reductionist, or maybe as just like exploring a fun little curiosity, it is, the ultimate goal is to pursue what this life is about. And I think a lot of times people unfairly think of science as more boring than it is, although my exploration of science is certainly a lot more exciting than scientists sometimes just having to like write grants, or like the day-to-day life sort of stuff, or mull through data, and even reading science books. Stuff can be boring sometimes. Some of the classes that I take can be boring, and it's all for a time. I don't read a science book just expecting every like a real page turner, every paragraph, like, whoa, what's gonna happen next? A lot of it for me is just sitting with the experience, of immersing myself in science and then waiting. And once in a while, there's just this epiphany where, like, oh my God, I just found out I may have been sleeping wrong my whole life. What? Or I think of like a good example. Here's a non science example that will maybe help resonate. I've shared this. A$AP Rock is one of my favorite rappers, not A$AP Rocky, A$AP Rock, and he's a bit of a hermit and pressed raps a lot about those things. Has incredible vocabulary and speaks in these metaphors, very sometimes pretty difficult, challenging to follow. And I was listening one day and I heard him talk about being young and not being into like traditional sports, instead being into skateboarding and kind of these individual extreme sports or whatever. And I kind of identify with that. And I heard him say something like, I heard him say this lyric. I'd like to say it was because I was a rebel, but truthfully, it's easier to say oh hell than say oh hello. And so you hear a powerful lyric like that, which for a lot of people might not, but for me, it was like, oh, all of these past experiences that I all of a sudden came rushing to the surface that I relived. And like, oh my gosh, that's what I did wrong. I thought that I was, I was being stubborn that whole time, or insecure that whole time, that I thought I was like being a cool guy by going against the grain or carving out my own path, and it made me kind of reevaluate some of my choices in life and rethink some of my future choices and how I want to relate to people going forward. And I have that experience with science all the time. And so when I think like, oh, science is boring, like, well, it certainly can be. Is it, much of it's like, to me, I am chasing the next epiphany. And an epiphany, being able to walk outside, having learned something that makes you see the world completely differently. I mean, I've traveled and I've been to, some foreign country, having some cultural experience that is really no jarring or novel or different than just learning some completely new concept about, say, cognitive biases, and then walking outside or turning on the news or whatever and seeing all of these same interactions that you've seen your whole life completely differently. And so it's funny, as someone who had success in traditional comedy, I did, sometimes people that aren't into science look at it as like this weird, nerdy little endeavor that I'm on of like, like people think of science as like Mr. Wizard stuff. Like I'm sitting around, making little, homemade volcanoes or something, or using like different food dye colors to, to like, red and blue makes purple. Like that's what I'm sitting around doing at home, because that is unfortunately some of the science. That's what kind of science class was like, and people don't realize like, well, why am I'm not abandoning comedy for my pursuit in science. These are one and the same. Comedy and science are doing the same. They're trying to observe and articulate these aspects of life, these parts of the human conditions that are that a lot of us are just walking by each day. This is what observational humor is. And so, someone might be like, well, I liked, I don't want to hear about, say, insect research. I don't care that much about insect I just want to hear, why don't you do like goofy jokes about truck commercials, more stuff like that. And although I still do tell goofy jokes, but those things just don't. Some of that stuff might stick with you, but I also can now use my humor to really examine life. And something like a truck commercial was really just me trying to articulate an aspect of the human experience. For example, how a lot of men try to advertise how tough they are, and it's really based in like these kind of absurd insecurities, and it really looks just absolutely ridiculous. The very thing that you think is making you look like tough or manly is to me making you look absolutely absurd. And part of how I arrive at that observation is by viewing all of us, including myself, like primates, and kind of detaching and putting an anthropologist hat on, looking at life from an alien anthropologist point of view. So when someone says, well, why would I care about insects, for example? I had an insect episode recently. I'd say, one, I agree with that. Like, I'm totally with you. I also, like, there's aspects of science that I'm not interested in, or I don't resonate with. Like, I've only had like 1 or 2 geologists on the show. It will take me a lot to learn geology. I don't naturally, I have a geologist friend who I go on hiking with him, and he points out like how, say, a certain cliff or something was formed over time, or this and that mineral. It's fascinating, and I usually don't retain much of it, and so I don't blame people for also not resonating with this or that episode. But I also know that it's part of just like I said, immersing yourself in science in the way that you would immerse yourself in traveling to another country to learn a new language would be the best way to learn that language. You can sit and study it and everything else, but to immerse yourself in it. And that's what I'm trying to do with my show. To hear that scientists are always like qualifying everything they say and second guessing themselves and thinking about, oh, well, but this other angle, and dismissing some of their past understanding, and looking for the ways in which they are wrong about things, which is this completely different experience than what a lot of the general population, just how incredibly difficult it is to get anyone to not just admit that they are wrong, but to admit that they might not know everything is refreshing to hear scientists talk in this way. But it helps me learn and understand scientific thinking. And so I might say, have an entomologist on talking about this and that bug part, and these different wings are on this species, and here's the Latin name of this species, and it kind of, a lot of it goes over my head. But I think that there's a natural resistance to that. I think that at first you hear a word you don't know, or you hear like some jargony stuff like that, and you think like, well, I'm not going to remember that, so why am I listening to? And instead, what I do is I just try to get a sense of what they're saying and what some of these underlying mechanisms are. And so when someone says like, and by the way, I'm only using insects as an example because I had an insect episode recently and it was really enjoyable. It's fresh on my mind. It's not like I was getting, this isn't to say that I was like, that I'm dealing with this a lot of like, why do you care about this stuff? But this is just to share that, I've also had some of these same feelings in my approach to learning and understanding things more, and certainly in my upbringing and my own lack of interest in science class. But I use insects because also because it's a subject that isn't a huge interest of mine. I don't know a lot about insects. I've read like a book or two about insects. I've seen a couple insects documentaries. I've had some guests on talking about insects, but I'm never like, guys, you gotta hear about insects. But the reason why one should value learning about insects, whether or not you pursue that or not, is not just because of things like understanding that social insects are have their own disease avoidance, and knowing more about that can help understand how humans can manage their own viral threats, bacterial threats. Knowing how ants or other social insects avoid their own epidemics can help us improve ours. Knowing how things that impact bees, and the extinction of bees, for example, or the threat of extinction of bees, that could be the collapse of human civilization as we know it. And so, there, not to mention medicines and things like that can potentially be understood from learning about insects. But more importantly, what you can learn is these underlying principles that drive everything. We can see our own social patterns through seeing other social species. We can think about how we see things compared to how a fly or some other insect sees things. Okay, cool. We walk standing upright. Neat. Why don't we have 8 legs? Sure would be nice to have 8 legs, right? No one would argue it'd be nice to have wings. I would love to be zipping around. And so what kind of different evolutionary pressures led to that life and led to ours, and to help us free ourselves from the kind of human exceptionalism that gets in the way of understanding ourselves, our misunderstanding that we are somehow the pinnacle of evolution. It helps us understand that what we are actually, what our niche is. Like, for example, we are fantastic tool makers and tool users. So, okay, I'm I'm a species that's better at tool use than other species. So I should probably use tools then, since that's my niche. And what's the greatest tool that there is science, I believe. And so to not be, that's the greatest tool so far, for its many imperfections, that that the greatest tool users have ever wielded. So to me, to not use it would be like a cheetah that's like, yeah, I'm not going to sprint. I'll just kind of jog like everything else does. So to be the greatest tool maker on and tool user out of any other species on Earth, and then to be within that using the greatest tool users have ever adapted, I think is to be living your life to its fullest. I believe it's to be realizing the fullness of the human potential as we know it today. And so, and also, I don't need to, the average person doesn't need to learn what's interesting about insects. The average person was already interested in insects. When you were a little kid, yes, you might have been horrified by insects, which is also interesting and worth understanding why, what evolutionary pressures led to that avoidance of insects. But you you probably, wanted to catch a butterfly and look at it, or looked at ants or whatever. You had a natural curiosity for insects. So I would say that you don't need to learn to appreciate something like insects. You have unlearned your appreciation for insects. So there's why is that? Is there something in our current education system and model that has us unlearning our natural curiosity? Or is it more benign than that? Is it just that you eventually hit puberty or whatever, you get interested in the opposite sex, you take on these new things, and you just lose sight of, or you're not going to benefit as much from sitting around looking at every anthill that you see when you're 40 years old or whatever. But the point is that there is a natural curiosity to understand within us, and whatever it is where we're instead just valuing kind of a passive entertainment experience of just like seeing the next CGI effects in action movies or whatever, that we need to see like a slightly more graphic scene or a bigger explosion. That to me, it has nothing on just exploring, just sitting and thinking and exploring our natural curiosities. So the reason why you would need to know something about insects is to understand, why do we like the things that we do? I avoid feces like every other human on Earth. We evolved to avoid feces. Seems very clear. Feces, bad. Stay away from it. Don't like the way it smells. Probably not touching the stuff if we can at all avoid it. And certainly trying to keep it pretty clear from our mouths. Seems pretty straightforward. This is what we call common sense. But what is common sense about? Is it because feces is inherently bad? Like the way we would talk about sin or evil or something? Or is this just an evolved preference, a heuristic that we have that helped our survival by avoiding this stuff? Because looking at, say, a dung beetle can help you see things a lot differently, because from a dung beetle's point of view, dung it's everything. There's species that don't just eat it or roll it around in this fun ball, but they might see a big piece of dung. This is going to be their home. This is how they pick up chicks. This is their Playboy mansion. This is where they're raising their offspring. This is their everything. Think about everything you value in life. Think about your hopes and dreams. Think about, like, wow, if I could maybe own a yacht or find that perfect someone for me, or that Michelin 4-star meal, or whatever, the best meal of your life. That's the same way that a dung beetle looks at the same big old pile of dung that you're avoiding, that you want to avoid stepping in. You don't want to get near. If you smell it from afar, you'd prefer to get away from it. And that's an exceptionally important lesson in life. And so when I say things like, hey, look at this damselfly penis, look at this weird thing, here's my favorite penis in the kind of insect and animal kingdom, this thing, it rolls out, it has these forceps, and this guy, the females in the damselfly species are have a lot of they mate with a number of different males, is one of the strategies that they've evolved to have the most or the highest quality offspring, and all of this, and there's all of these evolutionary pressures. And episode 1 of the Here We Are podcast, I shared one of my favorite quotes, which is, the chicken is just the egg's way of making another egg. Meaning, all of this that's been created, all of our behavior, really at the end of the day, was just this way that genes have stumbled on to keep making copies of themselves, to keep growing in their blind, kind of, as they're stumbling towards perhaps immortality. What kind of pressures were there to replicate more than another species? What kind of pressures were there between host and parasite? What kind of pressures between males and females once sexes evolved 1.2 billion years ago? Why wasn't there males and females before that for billions of years? These are the questions that lead to an examination of life as we know it now. These jokes about, like, boy, men and women are different, aren't they? Why those jokes? The underpinnings of those jokes are in evolutionary pressures, in these underlying biological mechanisms that shape who we are, and not only seeing a damselfly penis, that this guy has like these forceps and has to go in and scoop out a bunch of other guys' sperm first to blow his own wad in there to and hopefully more sperm, and a sperm have certain qualities that win this sperm competition before in a given species, maybe bless a bit of cement in there to plug the female up so that other guys are going to have a struggle to get their own sperm to her eggs, and her choice in these matters, and how many males she's driven to mate with. And all of these things are the same principles that underlie life itself. To understand the damselfly penis is to understand life itself, to understand why we have relationship conflicts. And so when people say, why should I care about something like insects, or say a damselfly penis, it almost sounds like like pursuing these trivial subjects. It's almost like I'm like have a podcast obsessing over my bottle cap collection or something like that. But this is actually the pursuit of knowledge, what this reality is about. And I know that people care because I know that people care about the Titanic in this love story that happens in this famous scene where they're holding one another, and there's this beautiful song, and every love song that you've connected to is basically just this. It is the damselfly penis. It's basically the same. What Leonardo DiCaprio is acting and pretending to be doing, the thing that you're attaching to, is the same sort of mating effort that damselfly is doing. And only the damselfly is real. And it's more interesting than the fiction created that millions of people pay money and see and remember. And this scene is, and that's not to dismiss art and metaphors or anything else, is just to appreciate actual reality. And so I would say that not only is it a better way and more useful to say, learn something about that seems as trivial as a damselfly penis, but it's far more useful because that scene in the Titanic is hopefully never happening to you. But a romantic scene like that in those romance, but you are usually being misled. When you worship whatever your sports hero is, or whatever, and or the action star, or whatever, you're usually creating a fiction that, one, is fiction. You're never going to be able to jump that far, or whatever. It's outside of reality. And even if you could, it probably wouldn't be all it's cracked up to be in the movies. And whereas to understand the damselfly penis is to be able to detach, to be able to have an alien anthropologist point of view that helps you understand yourself more. And I know people care about other life because people are out there trying to find Bigfoot and talking about extraterrestrials. Is there other life on this planet, outside of this planet? Of course there is somewhere, but at the end of the day, who cares? You're usually there's an alien pestering. There's a fly that you're trying to smack away from your ear right now. That's at least as interesting as any alien in any movie. And so why is it that we only seem to care about fictional aliens that are just kind of like us, same sort of body, maybe slightly different colored, like a green skin, maybe a slightly bigger brain, because our brains are great. We have the bigger the brain, the better. And boy, something out there smarter than humans. Well, they'd probably think much in the same way that we do, only slightly better. They must be roughly our size, something superior to us. They must use modes of transportation that are like slightly similar to modes of transportation, planes and cars and stuff that I'm familiar with, only better. And that's what some superior alien species would, just like humans, just like slightly different. There's aliens that you've smashed with a fly swatter. That's not to say any, do what you want. I'm just saying that you could actually learn and study that fly, and within that, go on a fascinating journey of understanding, and through it learn more about yourself, learn more about your very survival, and make your life better, and lead to more interesting conversations in your everyday life, rather than just talking about sports and the weather. And so if that's how much I care about a field of academic study that I don't really care that much about, that's my spiel about how much one should care about insects, a thing that I could maybe one in every 100 episodes or so. That's not true. I guess we've maybe had close to 10 episodes out of 300 on insects. But that's how much can be learned from just one little aspect of science. And I use that as an example because that's literally what we're doing. It might not seem like that in every episode, but learning, having to sit and hear some of these disciplines, because sometimes I don't know what I'm doing talking with this person. I'm okay, this person studies fish hearing. All right, I don't know anything about that. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't have anything to say. I hope I've come up with enough questions. It's scary. It's intimidating. And I go and do it. And then I find out, holy crap, this person's using fish hearing, the hair cells that regenerate in a fish, where humans' hair cells, they don't. Once they're damaged, they don't come back. That's why we lose our hearing over time. And this woman's trying to sort out what we can learn from fish cells to restore human hearing. Holy crap! How is this not the front page of every newspaper? Why am I the only person talking to this? Why am I just now finding out about this? It blows my mind. And so this isn't me saying, here's what's important about my podcast and everyone listen to every one of my podcasts and tell everyone you know about my podcast, and subscribe and leave comments and write wonderful reviews on iTunes and Stitcher and that sort of thing, and tell everyone you can, and use these fun facts in your conversations. This isn't why you should listen to the Here We Are podcast. This is why you should be curious about life. This is why you should, if you aren't into my style, I hope that you find another few science, but try a bunch of other science podcasts and see, because I think it's going to go a lot further than us spinning our wheels about the same political conversations over and over and over again. The things that at the end of the day is saying, hey, it is important to gain information about life. But a lot of the stuff on the news is just a misunderstanding of what life is about and what is actually going to help us make the most sense of life. So I hope you watch some David Attenborough documentaries, or check out some science documentaries. Maybe support some science shows or the Discovery Channel, things like that. And I wanted you to know just a little bit more about what science means to me and what my pursuit of science is. And so I'll be doing some solo episodes like this from time to time, starting from my early childhood on through like middle school, when I really despised school, to high school when I started having bigger philosophical conversations finally with people, when I started experimenting with mind-altering substances, which led to me becoming more and more passionate about trying to understand the brain, the human mind, consciousness, perception, and then I'll eventually talk about my comedy career, which went from kind of this big childhood dream to a dream come true, to something that I ultimately just started kind of using as a vehicle to for exploration, just a way of funding my pursuit of knowledge and information, and as a platform for sharing the things that I'm learning, and how I got into pursuing this podcast in the first place, and what I've learned along the way. And this will be a good way for me to also do some Q&As and to answer questions. So if you didn't like this episode, cheers! If you like all the other episodes and you're not into the solo episode, awesome. Now you know. And you can avoid those other ones. Like I said, this will just be a bonus one. And if you liked this and you eventually want more things like this, one of the awesome things that now that we're in quarantine, and we're able to now I've taken this opportunity to add video, since I have to do these things remotely now anyway, and now have started a YouTube channel, which I didn't have before quarantine, and I'm still figuring out how to do right, and but making a lot of progress, and learning so much, but one of the great things that's coming along with it is the ability to make different playlists. So I'll be able to have a playlist of just my solo episodes. I really want to work toward having a playlist of biology or evolutionary psychology, a playlist of mating behavior, and finally have this way of creating all of these different categories. And even though I don't have that many, it's episode 300, but I've only been doing the videos since quarantine, I will continue even once I'm traveling again and going to academics. That's when the fun's really going to begin, because I'm going to start filming those so that you can see, these academics' offices. Maybe a few minutes of me taking a tour of their lab, and some of the behind the scenes stuff and the research. Some of the cool tours that I get to go on in this journey. And so, these are some of the possibilities that I'm pursuing and exploring. Always looking for feedback. Like I said, YouTube's brand new, so I know a lot of you listening right now. Thank you for the years of support. If any of you have the inclination to hop over to check out the YouTube channel, if you want to watch some, and see, everyone's different. The audio is going to be so much better for a lot of people who listen when, a lot of people are listening when they're driving in their car, or when they're, working at, in like a shipping receiving or something like that. But I know some of you are going to benefit from watching this as well, and getting to see our facial expressions, and to see, say, Barrett Klein talk the most enthusiastically about insects that you'll ever hear. And I just want to thank you guys so much for checking out what I do, because doing 300 episodes of this, I hope that you've learned a lot. I've learned so much of it drops right out of my head as soon as the interview's over. But more importantly, just every episode I get a few little nuggets here and there, and it over time just continues to shape my the way in which I conceptualize life and process information and gain knowledge and pursue a more interesting life for myself. So thanks for watching and listening. You guys are amazing. Those of you that watch and listen all the way to the end, you are, of course, my favorites.